Hello and welcome to the Poultry Network podcast. I'm Tom Woolman, and I'm pleased to say this week that I'm joined by a special guest. Tom Willings unfortunately can't make it for this section of the podcast, but I'm joined by editor of Poultry Network, Jake Davis. Hi, Jake.
Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Excellent. Yeah. You did a couple of podcasts, didn't you, earlier on in the series, but you haven't made an appearance recently, have you? But
no, I've been hiding away. No, I don't know whether I've been on in 2026. I'm not sure.
No, you did one with Ian Pick, didn't you, when I couldn't make it? And I think actually, when we look at some of the views on YouTube, that's actually one of the most popular podcasts that we've done.
Yes. Yeah, well, understandably, Ian's got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. But yeah, no, I like I say, I don't know whether I've done one this year. This is the first one. So I'm nervous.
Well, just to make it clear for those listening, Jake is always there, but he's in the background doing the recording and sending us messages saying you've spent too long talking about this subject, you need to move on, or other things. But also wanted to make the point, this is actually the 50th episode of the Poultry Network podcast, so thought probably pass on the back for you, Jake, for having the inception that a poultry podcast would be a good idea, and for getting it this far. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice, a nice round 50 episodes. And we've, I of all the things I do in my interesting and diverse job, the podcast is genuinely a real pleasure for both of you, Toms. I mean, you're great guys to work with. Let's not blow too much smoke around, but yeah, I think we've had some fantastic guests in the first sort of 12 months or so. I mean, particularly strong few weeks now. Yeah, Vera Bavink a couple of weeks ago with talking about the Kipster system. We had that great sort of Young Guns episode before that. It really is, when you think there's sort of conferences now and then, and we'll come on to our conference in a moment, I suppose, but there's limited opportunities in my view, to hear from people doing really interesting stuff in the poultry sector. And I really hope that what we're doing gives people an opportunity, whether they're sort of on farm or driving around visiting places, to sort of keep up with what's going on in a user-friendly format. So yeah, hats off to you and Tom for helping deliver 12 months of poultry podcasting, as you say.
May it continue. Oh, may it continue. So you talked there a little bit about the Poultry Network podcast, which I know is coming up on the 3rd of September. Is that right?
Well, you just said the Poultry Network podcast, which is actually happening as we speak.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, the Poultry Network conference. I'm so used to it; just trips off my tongue. That's the trouble.
I know, one of the diverse poultry things we do. Yeah, the conference 3rd of September. For people who've been before, there isn't a dramatic change to the format. We've got as usual a bit of a scene setter at the start, so we're hoping to get some sort of board level poultry and egg people. I'm really pleased to say we've got Ken Clow coming along from Noble Foods. I'm not sure he's sort of spoken on a big forum like this before. Yeah, we've got the usual health session. So a big part of that will be looking at what's coming up in the winter, particularly with avian influenza. But I'm sure, things like Newcastle disease are on people's radar as well. So we'll try and cover the big, broad health topics. And then in the afternoon, we did it for the first time last year, and I think it worked quite well. And Tom, you joined and helped with this. We're going to split into broiler and eggs, and we're going to do health topics. We're going to do business topics, so how to run your business and things like that. How better to farm your birds, and then we're going to do a session on artificial intelligence as well, and how that's shaping the poultry sector. So we've got a few names to announce and things, but that's a rough format of the day.
And if people want to come along, what do they have to do?
You have to buy a ticket. Just to explain how the ticketing works, if you're working in poultry production, whether that's you're a farmer or whether you work for a integrator or an egg packer, if you're dealing with birds or at least adjacent to that, then tickets are £50 plus VAT, £49.50. And if you're in the trade, so if you're supplying people in production, a ticket is £200. So, we sold out last year. So if you are thinking of coming along, make sure it's in your diary and get a ticket as soon as you can. You do so by visiting our website, and at the top tab, there's a Poultry Network Live tab, and you can see all the details there. as they're announced.
So
That's
just
right.
yeah. What's the Poultry Network website? That's poultry.network, isn't it?
It's poultry.network. Yes. Yeah. Exactly that. Thank you, Tom.
Brilliant concept that you've come up with there.
I feel like you're helping me along here because I'm not as polished as you after 50 episodes.
Well, you say you're not as polished, but here I am calling a conference a podcast and a podcast a conference. Should we move on to what we're going to talk about today?
Yes. Well, confusingly, I'm not going to be talking about it.
No. So for those who are listening and think that we sometimes just sit down and do this in one take, we tend to record the intro separately to the actual podcast. And Tom Willings and I have done the interview today, but unfortunately, Tom's been a busy boy. Tom is a busy boy, and he's very busy, and he hasn't managed to find the time to do the intro. Hence why I thought it's a good opportunity to sit down with Jake and talk about the conference and other things that are going on. But today, Tom and I are going to be talking to Ian Lowery from Crowshall Vets, who's done this really interesting study on water hygiene and whether it makes a difference. Essentially, that's the wraparound subject. And Ian's a great guy. His water presentations are quite famous. A lot of people have seen them. And also, I thought it's going to be a very interesting take on something that I think we all take as gospel now, which is that you need clean water to get top performance. Now, that's what everyone's been saying for the last 10 years. So Ian's just going to unpick that for us a little bit. So looking forward to that. Should we get into it?
That's it.
Looking for a cost-effective way to put your business in front of the UK's poultry sector? The Poultry Network directory gives suppliers a direct and highly targeted route to poultry producers across the country. The directory is posted directly to 2,000 UK poultry farms, putting your company, products and contact details into the hands of the people who matter. Your listing will also remain live on Poultry Network for 12 months, providing valuable year-round online visibility. An enhanced listing costs just £695 plus VAT. Based on the print distribution alone, that works out at less than 35 pence per farm, before you even account for 12 months of exposure on the Poultry Network website. Positions are limited, so secure your place before the best opportunities are booked or taken by a competitor. Booking is quick and straightforward. For more information, visit the Poultry Network website or contact Jake at dmediagroup.com.
Ian Lowery, welcome to the Poultry Network podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you ever so much for having me.
Thank you, Ian. No, it's great to be joined by you. And you work for Crowshall, don't you? What's your official title at Crowshall?
So I'm a director of Crowshall Veterinary Services. So we're a poultry-only practice, dealing with a really wide range of kind of feathered species, layers, breeders, broilers, turkeys, ducks, and some game birds through the season.
You're based in Norfolk, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So we're just outside Norwich and we kind of cover a lot of the east of the UK.
And I believe congratulations are in order because I believe you've just become an official doctor. Is that right?
That's correct. I have. So only yesterday I was in London wearing a red gown and a floppy, I believe they call it a beret. I was expecting to get a mortarboard, but because it was a doctorate level thesis that I had submitted and been awarded, you get a kind of a floppy hat, a la Harry Potter, really. But it was a lovely day in the sunshine yesterday, and really proud moment for myself to get that doctorate after so many years.
I do remember that actually all the different qualifications have got slightly different outfits that go with them, haven't they? So you can see just how brainy people are when everyone's in the room together.
Tom, you said that almost as though you've got your own PhD.
No. I've got a degree, but so I'm just thinking back to my own graduation. But there's quite a lot.
You think you're doing awfully well until the professors with orbs and scepters kind of walk to the stage, and you think, oh, maybe there's still some way to go.
So, in actual fact, we're going to talk about your your study, your doctorate, the subject of your PhD today, Ian. Why don't you set the scene for us?
So I started my kind of post-vet degree academic journey by doing a postgraduate certificate, which was very broad, semi-taught, semi-self-directed, but looking at lots of little snippets of intensive livestock, which was predominantly poultry and pigs. And when I finished that course, I was invited to extend it into a doctorate study, which again involved a little bit of taught work, a few studies around how organizations work, and then eventually we were kind of set off to do some research of our own. And I've always been interested in water quality in poultry, and I'm sure many people have seen me do my kind of talk on water quality over the years. But I was acutely aware that a lot of that information was based on kind of, if you like, a gut feeling for what ought to be right. Some information that had been acquired over the years from talking to experts like Susan Watkins at Arkansas, the little bit of information that's out there in the published kind of peer-reviewed world around water quality. But really, we were flying slightly blind. And so I was really keen that my kind of field of study would try and add some actual data, some figures, some numbers to that kind of field of interest. So it's been quite a long time in the workings. But yeah, I got to a point in last October where it was published, and then it gets marked and you get a viva and eventually get it over the line.
No, I think it's a fascinating subject for research, Ian, because when I think back to when I started in the poultry sector, there really wasn't a huge amount of stuff done with regards to water hygiene. Most farms weren't doing anything when it comes to keeping their water clean. And if you look now, there's this great big ecosystem of all sorts of companies offering different systems, different products. And it's quite unusual now for me to turn up to a farm where they're not doing something and they're not spending quite a lot of money on keeping their water clean. And I also think when you're looking at water hygiene results, when you're doing water testing, sometimes what you're putting in at one end doesn't necessarily seem to correlate with what you're getting out at the back end. So I'm quite interested to find out really what you did with your research and particularly, what sort of research was out there previously with regards to water hygiene when everyone embarks on this great journey to clean up our water.
Excellent. So, I mean, I think you've really just exploded right into the sort of the background of my paper, really. You know, why did we get to where we are? Is a litre of water a litre of water? Does it matter if it comes from the mains or a borehole? Does it matter if it's dirty or clean? And they were the kind of questions that I started with. And I guess you've got two ways to look at it. And I didn't know which one was right. One way is to say that actually, through the history of us keeping livestock as a species, it generally has been in order to make use of marginal ground, feed stuff that we can't eat like grass, and water that we can't drink because it's dirty. So are livestock a way of turning things that humans can't eat and drink into something that they safely can? In which case we shouldn't be worried about water quality. That's kind of their job, to give them rubbish water and get healthy meat out at the end. Or is there palpable improvements in performance and efficiency and economics to be realized by giving particularly these intensively managed birds a really, really good quality water? So the study started really with a literary review, like many studies do, just to try and understand what is out there, what do we already understand. And actually, if you go to one of these big libraries like PubMed, where all of the published literature is held, and you type in something like broiler drinking water or poultry drinking water, you get thousands of results. But the vast majority of them, the water is not the subject of the study. The subject of the study is a novel feed ingredient, artichoke oil or something that somebody somewhere perceives might have an improvement for the intestinal health, and they've done a test, and as part of that test they might have monitored the amount of water consumption, or it might have been delivered through the drinking water, so it comes up in that search. So when you sieve through these hundreds and thousands of published papers that are out there to actually try and understand what has been done that looks very clearly and concisely at the question of, what in drinking water is good or bad for poultry health. There comes very little. You end up with 30 or 40 papers that some of them I asked 3 or 4 different questions when I was doing that literary review, and there's a lot of overlap. So those same papers are being cited again and again and again. And actually, what we found, which I guess is potentially concerning, potentially alarming, potentially quite useful for future direction of where the industry goes, is the broad range of bacterial contamination of drinking water that was out there in the published work bore no relationship at all really to the thresholds that we are applying to poultry when we have an audit or when we are trying to achieve the standards that we have nominally or notionally decided are necessary. So we had examples of unsanitized drinking water in the published literature with TVC counts of 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, 1.5 million colony forming units per mil. So huge levels of bacterial contamination in the water lines, known in the public domain as being there. And yet we have a kind of a system that we have decided, rightly or wrongly over time, should be very clean. And then we haven't really defined what very clean is. And some people have plumped for less than 1,000 colony forming units. Some people have plumped for less than 300. Some people have literally just let the producer decide whether the water result they get back from the lab is potable for poultry or not. So I guess that was the first thing that was really telling in the study, is that actually we don't know what normal is. So we spent a lot of time looking at that data and really trying to understand what was out there in the public domain. Yeah, super interesting, but as I say, quite alarming from how have we got here when we don't even really know where here is?
Yeah, and thinking about it, one of the big drivers was probably the push to reduce antibiotic use, wasn't it? And that was certainly a big thing that was going on in the States. They had a whole scheme, probably less so now, but a lot of producers producing without any antibiotics at all. And I know that focusing on water hygiene was one thing that people were looking at to make sure that they were reducing the amount of antibiotics that were needed to give to the chickens. But as you say, that might have just been a bit of a precautionary principle, really, without a whole lot of evidence behind it. So tell me a little bit more about what you did after you did your literature review. You've actually done an experiment, haven't you? A proper trial on a farm.
So stage 2 was to try and understand what is going on out there. And we went to a farm that has, it's 2 farms adjacent to each other under the same kind of management. So all together within these 2 farms, we've got 16 sheds, and we followed those 16 sheds for 4 full cycles. And at each time we were taking water samples before the birds went in. We took them at 7 days, at 14 days, and at 28 days of age. And so we gained a huge number of water samples through the course of those 16 sheds, 4 cycles. But also we subjected those water samples to a really broad range of testing, because we wanted to understand what was in there more than just a colony forming unit per mil, because I think there is a lot of devil in the detail here. And if we just say, well, we grew some bacteria, we are potentially missing some nuance around what kind of bacteria we grew. Are some bacteria helpful? Are some bacteria less helpful? We have limitations with that test anyway. So perhaps I should just backtrack a little bit. So when we test the water by a TVC test, so that means total viable count, we're putting the water onto an agar plate, and we do it serially. So we might dilute the water sample 10 times, 100 times, and 1,000 times. We put it onto 3 agar plates, we incubate them, and then that agar plate doesn't care what sort of bacteria it's dealing with. It lets all bacteria grow. So then when we look at the plate after it's been incubated, we can count how many colonies there are, how many bacterial colonies there are, and we can apply some maths to it to understand how many colony forming units per mil there are. So what that tells us is how many alive bacteria there are doesn't really give us any indication of what type of bacteria they are. And we are assuming if that water sample has come through the end of the lines and been caught into a sort of a universal, like a urine sample type pot, we're assuming that's bacteria that are free floating in the water. But we also wanted to understand a little bit about what that bacteria was. So we also plated those bacteria onto different types of media, which give us a little bit more of a morphological idea about what sort of bacteria we're dealing with. So we can understand if they're E. coli or Pseudomonas or Staphylococcus. And we also took long swabs from the end of the line. So these are swabs that literally rub the inside of the pipe as you insert them into the end of the lines. And that tells us more about these bacteria that are or eventually become biofilm, that are really tightly adhered to the inner plastic surface of the pipe. And the reality is that all of these things combine together to yield the type of water that our chickens are drinking, because even the tightly adhered biofilm undergo a life cycle where they grow and they grow and they grow and then they shed. So sometimes they are feeding into the birds. And obviously what's free floating in the water, that's what our birds are drinking day in, day out. That's the water that we're feeding to them. So we gathered all of this data through the 4 cycles of the 16 sheds. Crucially, we had split the site into different groups. So some of the sheds received no water sanitising at all during flock life. All of the sheds received some sanitizer at turnaround, because that was part of the farm's routine programme. So a quarter of the sheds received no sanitizer at all through the flock cycle. One group of sheds received chlorine through the flock life. One group of sheds received a silver-stabilised peroxide, and the final group received a non-silver-stabilised peroxide, which seems to be the way that kind of peroxide product is going through various EU pressures around how those products are allowed to be licensed. And we moved them around at random for each flock. So essentially, there could be no shed factor. If shed 1 happened to always perform better, they didn't always have the same treatment. It had one treatment one time, a different treatment the second time, a different treatment the third time, and a different treatment the fourth time. So we were able to control for loads and loads of external influences like temperature or stockmanship or what have you, to really understand what was going on with the water and with those sanitizers. And then when we had all of that data brought in, we overlaid on top of that the performance data for those flocks. So we could look at the FCR and the EPEF and the daily weight gain and the mortality and antibiotic usage. And so essentially that allowed us at the end to paint kind of 3 pictures, I guess. One was, what is normal? If you don't sanitize your shed, what happens? What's normal? And the second thing was, well, if you do sanitize your shed, what's the benefit? What does it look like? How does that affect the bacterial populations? And then the third one was, and does it pay for itself? What's the economic and or welfare and or antibiotic stewardship benefit of all of this investment in water sanitizers?
I guess there's another, it's kind of 2.5 is, if you are sanitizing, how do each of the different sanitization programs differ? What's the the hierarchy of efficacy of the different products in use?
Yes, and I think there is some stuff there that we're just starting to see some really interesting that it almost wants to move on to what's the next step and what's the next study, and I guess that's
there's definitely another PhD
academia,
in this. There's another PhD coming, isn't there, Ian? For somebody, whether it's for you or for somebody else.
Yeah, well, there is, because there's some really interesting things there where you just go, well, hold on a second, like that happened. So what if we do something slightly different? And actually, one of the take homes for me, I think, and I'm sure we'll drill into this shortly, is I'm not convinced that. Well, I'm absolutely convinced that there is no one size fits all, and we'll talk about that in a second, I'm sure. I just think that there are so many variations and nuances on how each shed manages its water supply that I can't believe there can be a one size fits all. But there was also very specific examples where one particular sanitizer appeared to be great until something happened and then it no longer was. So, what happened? Do you need one sanitizer for the whole flock, or should you adjust your sanitizer selection depending on the circumstances and depending on what is going on outside? And the classic example I think of that is temperature. You know, as we saw high house temperatures, we were seeing the houses that were chlorine sanitized drop away in performance. And I believe that that is because as you kind of approximate to 30 degrees with chlorine, you'll get a little bit of gassing off, and you'll get a little bit of that swimming pool type flavor to the water, and you just end up drinking a little bit less, eating a little bit less at a time when it's hot outside, and really you should be drinking a little bit more.
And did you consider doing chlorine dioxide as well, Ian? Because I know that's something that a lot of producers will be using.
Yes, is the short answer to that. So there was two things which steered me away from that. The first is that when I did my literary review, there was very little in the literature around chlorine dioxide, and because I had kind of good research, you spell out what you're going to do, and then you do it, and then you write it up, and if you deviate or U-turn halfway through, then your marker will tell you that you've not been a robust scientist. So I had said that part of the literary review stage, which was done in a really strategic way, that was going to inform what chemicals we would use, and chlorine dioxide just didn't come up very often. Now, I think that honestly is a damning indictment of us as an industry. You know, we just haven't invested in the kind of research that needs to be done in recent times, and chlorine dioxide is a relatively newer application in the poultry sector. So, you know, the papers that we were pulling were from the 90s and the early 2000s, and chlorine dioxide's been around with us since, I don't know, probably the early teens, hasn't it, as an IWS or alternative type program where people are there continuously. So I was kind of hamstrung in that I'd said this is what I'm going to do, and all of the literary review came back with chlorine and peroxide. So then that's kind of where I was.
So,
the second thing is there's obviously a cost implication. So the farm that I used didn't have any true inline dosing systems. We were using just normal, you know, they don't have the complicated mechanisms that were needed for delivering the chlorine dioxide.
And presumably that's not something that you can necessarily use in a shed one crop, and then you'd have to move it to another shed, wouldn't you? So
so the challenge of getting all 16 kitted out and running would have been mega, I think.
So in broad terms then, what were the findings of your study? What did you find out?
So when we look at the unsanitized water, we see a surprising, so this farm had a really, really robust terminal disinfection program. You know, they were running concentrated sanitizer to the end of the lines, holding it there for 48 hours, flushing it, putting it back in for another 24 hours, flushing it again, like doing a visual check to make sure that there was no signs of any residual activity as that water hit the concrete before priming the lines with fresh water for the chick delivery. But despite that, we were still finding moderate amounts of bacteria in the drinking lines at day 0. So in that 24, 36 hour gap between priming the lines and putting the chicks in, we were getting bacteria getting into the water lines. Very, very little biofilm, but lots of free floating bacteria, and the types of bacteria that we know can become biofilm. So Staphylococcus and Pseudomonas in particular. And then in that first week, the levels of bacteria skyrocketed. They went really, really high. This is in unsanitized flocks.
In the control,
exactly. And then from day 7 through to day 28, we saw a really nice decline in the amount of bacteria across all of the sampling modalities. So the real kind of peak for those birds was at 7 days. Those birds with no sanitizer in, they have got lots and lots of bugs in the water lines at 7 days, and then it dwindles away and it drops down to near enough the sort of the day 0 level by 28 days. And the treated flocks, and there was nuance here, but largely speaking across the board, had the opposite. So again, they started with some amount of bacteria in, and then at day 7, it plummeted. Those sanitizers in that environment, which is relatively low water flow and quite high temperatures, appear to work really well. All of them. They just appear to work really well. It shoots down and then it starts to creep back up over time. So the premise, I think, there is that in unsanitized flocks, you're depending entirely on flow to try and control your bacterial contamination. So when it is low flow at the beginning, those bacteria shoot up, and when the birds start to drink a bit more and you've got more flow through the drinking water lines, you are shedding some amount of that bacteria, and that bacteria is ultimately, I guess, being consumed by the bird. That's where it goes when the birds are drinking a lot. But we ended up with this opposite effect, and then when you've got sanitizer available, you can really drop the levels of bacteria in those first 7 days. But then as the flow increases and the contact time between the water and the bugs reduces, and also the temperatures reduce, so those chemicals become a little less chemically active, then we end up with a buildup of bacteria, but never getting to anywhere near the same sort of levels as you had in the control group. So that was kind of our first finding, and it was very replicable. You know, the variation between flocks was pretty low, and the findings were nicely replicable.
And I suppose I'm dying to know as well, what did you actually see in terms of bird performance? Which treatment gave the best in terms of bird performance? What differences were there?
So the big headline figures for that part of the study was that we didn't find any. And again, I was surprised, and we applied many different statistical modeling techniques and linear modeling to understand, were there variables in there that we hadn't captured properly, that we didn't understand. But the long and short of it was that between any of the treatment groups and the control, or all of the treatment groups and the control, there was no benefit from an FCR, cumulative mortality, daily weight gain, EPEF, or antibiotic use point of view.
And Ian, were you as shocked about that as Tom and I are sat here, and I'm sure anybody else listening? Because start with dirty water, apply no sanitation, water gets dirtier. Apply sanitation, it gets better. Not rocket science so far. Different products working at different levels. No great surprise. But it doesn't yield. Cleaning the water doesn't yield any economic benefit according to the studies that you've performed. That is.
I mean, I went back to my research supervisor and went, oh dear, researchers being researchers, he said, well, a result is an interesting result. And I said, but this result can't be right, because, this industry, we've really gone in heavy for clean water. I've spent a lot of my professional career talking to groups and producer groups and writing
your
articles.
presentation's going to have to change, isn't it?
My presentation's going to have to change.
Yeah, and you single-handedly sort of ruined the water hygiene industry. No, we're joking.
And it's not. It is absolutely not as black and white as this. It can't be. There are lots and lots of nuance there.
So let's have a few minutes then working out what it does tell us, and how what you've learnt in this study with broilers might apply to other species that are in the house for a lot longer. Why you think that the results are as they are?
So I think part of this is around a numbers game. Yes, I did 4 cycles of 16 sheds, so 64 kind of test points, if you like. And yes, I took lots and lots of data out of each test point. But from a scientific study design point of view, you would say that actually you've basically only looked at 64 patients, if you like. Many millions of broilers, but only 64 data points to look at the result for. So potentially you could extend this study out and find more. I think there were 2 or 3 really, really interesting elements whereby largely speaking, in early life, we saw kind of peroxides working slightly better, and later life, we saw chlorine working slightly better, with the proviso that if it was hot, it worked a little less well. So I do wonder whether actually the answer is we need to really have a much more nuanced approach to water sanitizing, which might pick different chemicals for different occasions. The broiler sector, and this actually was in my original work way before I did this research, but the broiler sector does have the benefit of being short cycles, a turnaround time, and the ability to really blitz that water system at turnaround. And so there is a huge amount to be said, I think, for that still standing. And we haven't studied that. Our water work didn't, it took that turnaround program as a given and as effective. We did do some preliminary work just to prove that the water at the time that the sanitizer was in there was clean. But we didn't, that was outside of the scope of the study. So again, I think we just need to kind of drill into that nuance. So if you had a broiler farm that wasn't doing very good water sanitizing at turnaround, I feel pretty confident that having an in-flock program would be really helpful. If you have guys even doing kind of heavy cockerels, but certainly free-range broilers, turkeys, layers, where your flock cycle is really much longer, it seems to me still really likely that we can manage that water system in a way that would benefit the birds if we had sanitizer on board and can keep those bacterial levels low. We saw slight differences in the type of bacteria that was present kind of as we did some sanitizing as well. So less Pseudomonas, and we know that Pseudomonas can be linked with ill health in birds. And we know also that Pseudomonas is quite likely to adhere to sanitizer lines and set up a sort of a biofilm formation. So again, I think given a longer study with longer lived birds, you would start to realize the benefit of some of those things. So yeah, I absolutely, the intention here is not to pull the rug under the water sanitizing industry. I remain a proponent. I just think we need to be kind of aware of quite what it is that we are achieving. And actually what we proved really nicely is that water sanitizers kill bacteria in water lines. What we were sadly not able to prove was, and it's 10 times cost beneficial because you get 3 points of FCR. But I suspect there are further follow-up studies which might start to point us in the direction of how we should best look at that part.
Thank you for coming on today, Ian, and for sharing your research with us. I think it's really brilliant to have someone like you that's actually out there working day in, day out in the poultry sector that's also doing proper applied research that farmers are going to find really useful. So I just want to say full credit to you, and particularly for looking into something that people are using on an everyday basis without necessarily giving any further thought to. But we're not, as you make the point, we're not really drilling down into the research and how do we know we're getting a cost benefit? How do we know that this is going to improve things? I think from my experience, quite a few farmers use water sanitation. It's almost a little bit like an insurance. We know that, particularly with broilers, things can come along and can knock them sideways. And if you know that you're giving them clean water, maybe that's one less thing to worry about. But yeah,
I think you're exactly right there, Tom. And we didn't capture any of that either. So, why does a producer want to sanitize their water lines? Well, either because day to day they perceive a cost benefit, which I haven't been able to demonstrate, but I'm not saying necessarily is absolutely not there. Maybe it's just to tick a box so that their auditor doesn't tell them off. And, that's a reasonable objective in this day and age. But maybe it is those black swan events, the salmonellas, the things which can come in and really clobber a flock. And actually, you would spend within reason in order to avoid those. So that is, again, a really pertinent point that we didn't capture at all in the study. We did reference it. We did say, maybe there is a human objective type point to this that we haven't seen in the data. And that shouldn't be discounted as actually quite important.
thanks for coming in, and I look forward to speaking again at some time.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much for having me.
Well, what a fantastic interview. And for those who are listening and not watching, what you also didn't realise is that there were 3 bold blokes chatting away about chickens there, when usually there's only 2 bold blokes. So really, we look like we all could have been hatched from the same clutch, me, Tom, and Ian. I thought that was brilliant. It's great that we've got a vet in the sector who is actually doing applied research, and someone that's not just going around and talking the talk and writing prescriptions and talking at conferences, someone that's actually doing research and doing research into things that people are spending a lot of money on at the moment, and actually trying to dig down into what's effective and what's not. And because, there's a myriad of different companies that are there now with different water hygiene solutions, different products. You put people from various companies in a room together and they all start falling out about the best way to clean your water. And I just thought that, Ian's program was a great insight into what's worth doing. I mean, I'm astounded if you by the actual result and the fact that he didn't in his research, he didn't actually find a performance benefit of water hygiene. I find that astounding. But I don't know, as with any other piece of research, you create a hypothesis and you create some tests and some treatments to look into whether that hypothesis is true or not. No piece of research is ever gospel. It's another piece of the jigsaw puzzle that you put together to build your understanding of what's actually going on. But this is a really interesting piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and I think one that opens doors for all sorts of other questions and all sorts of other pieces of research. Yeah. What did you think, Jake?
Yeah. At the risk of sounding silly, this is your area of expertise, Tom. I know you're living and breathing this sort of every day,
and drinking it, living, breathing, and drinking water hygiene.
And quite a contrary, I suppose, conclusion that we'll have a lot of people interested in what they're doing on farm. I think I'd like to point to one of the remarks I made in the intro, which is. Thank you to Ian and all of our recent guests and everyone else who's come on the podcast and talked to us. Ian only picked up his PhD the day before he came on and spoke to us, so it was really, really good of him to do that. And the other thing, which wasn't mentioned because it was post recording, was he had a bit of an internet challenge or whatever, and it took hours and hours and hours for the recording to upload from his device up onto the cloud. So thank you very much, Ian, for persevering with that and making the time, obviously.
He recorded it on his phone, didn't he? And then he had to leave it uploading. So if anyone really struggled to get hold of Ian Lowery for a portion of a couple of hours, well, that might be because he was trying to record the podcast and upload it during that time. So thanks for your time on that, Ian.
Yeah. And huge credit to him because, as long as I've known him, which is for over 10 years, I think, as you say, water's been his topic, and he just seems to drill in and get more and more into it, and it's a huge advantage to the sector that he's done so. So yeah, cheers, Ian.
Very good. So 50 episodes in, Jake.
Yep.
Here's to another 50.
Yeah.
I'm sure if we get to 100 episodes, we'll have to do something special, do some sort of live episode.
Well, I feel like we should be wearing party hats, but we're not that organised, are we? So we'll have to get party hats at least for the 100th. Maybe we'll have a real party. Who knows?
Who knows? Well, the real party hopefully will be at the Poultry Network conference. That's where we'll get together and celebrate in person.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to say as well is this is for you guys out there in the UK poultry sector. So please do keep suggesting, ideas, comments, come forward, come and tell us what you're up to. It doesn't matter whether it's, a commercial idea or whatever. We'll consider anyone really. So just my email's editor@poultry.network. And you can just send me an email or give me a call if you've got my number. And just get in touch, get involved. Here's to another 50 and onwards.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Jake. Good to talk.
Cheers, Tom. Nice
Bye
one.
for now.
See you soon.